Hey there, welcome to this course. We're going to be discussing the case for why you want to have a bigger athletic ass. I wanted the title to catch some eyes, but essentially what we're talking about is the posterior chain. This is something that I see in a lot of athletes, especially our running athletes and our field athletes. We see a lot of injuries that keep cropping up, so I decided to make a presentation that is going to kind of hopefully explain everything that's going on and so that it can make sense to everybody. So hey, my name is Dr. Erik UUKSULAINEN. I'm a chiropractor, and we're going to learn some cool stuff today. So here we go. So here's some boring legal stuff. Basically, all this says is that we're just going to be having a discussion. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about. If I haven't evaluated you personally, you have to take this with a grain of salt, but just recognize and understand that all of this stuff that I'm going to be sharing with you today is stuff that we see and I've given to my athletes in the past and athletes that I'll be giving to in the future. So just basically learn and absorb a lot of cool stuff. So we're just going to have a conversation. All right. So the objectives of this course, so what we're going to be learning is we're going to be talking about what is an athlete who sits, a sitting athlete. I say a lot to our athletes, posture equals performance. So if I can improve your posture, I can also improve your performance athletically. We also want to talk about plugging holes, especially if you're a lower body athlete. And if you are, that's probably why you're watching this video. What we want to do is essentially strengthen the muscle tissues that have become weak. And we also want to stretch the muscle tissues that have become tight. Third, what we want to do is we want to learn about why getting strong matters, and I'm going to be using a sprinting analogy to overlay that. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about what I believe to be the minimum acceptable standards for peak performance and injury reduction. So this is the good stuff. This is what everybody's come for. So if you want to skip ahead into the video about halfway or possibly a little bit further on, that's where all the exercises are housed. Everything is referenced. There's a lot of stuff that you guys will be able to see, and we'll be going over that as we go through the presentation. But if you want to get there ahead of time, be my guest, not a problem. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Okay, so first, we have a little bit of context. We have a fitness problem, and we also have what I call a sitness problem. When you guys are young, everybody takes for granted their physiology. Your bodies can show up. You can literally roll out of bed and put down a couple of PRs, have a couple of good races, maybe, roll out of bed and have a great exam. But what happens when your body doesn't show up for you? That's when the injuries start to happen. So sometimes this can be training overload, or sometimes this can just be an accumulative effect, or sometimes it can be something fluky that happens every once in a while. We also want to talk about a student's life versus an athlete's life. So you guys do a lot of time, you guys are sitting for long periods of time, and then you may have a bout of exercise where you're training for maybe 60 minutes to 90 minutes, but then after that, you're going to go right back to sitting. So what you did is you went from a low level of activity to a very high level of activity, and then back to a low level activity. So that's a lot for the body to adjust to. So let's talk about plugging some holes in your fitness. So one of the big things that I see, and I see this with all my runners, whether you're a sprinter or if you are a cross-country athlete, is runners only move in one plane, right? You're only going forward in terms of your momentum. So what happens is, being that that's the only set of muscle tissues you work, there's a lot of lateral stabilizer muscle tissues that you don't really train because you're just focused on that forward momentum. So a lot of times you've been told that in order to become a better athlete, you just have to run more miles, but we want to add a little bit more to that. We want to add some more value there. A second problem is that runners are single leg athletes, meaning that you're pivoting from one leg to the other, back to the other leg, back to the other. So there's really not a lot of time where you're spending on both feet. So why this is important is what it translates to is you guys end up having poor lateral stability, and we see that in the muscle tissues in the sides of your legs when we test for it. All runners have balance issues. I encourage you to just stand up on one foot for about 30 seconds and see how wobbly you are. We also see forced absorption issues, and traditionally this is where we start to see, or the athletes start to experience some stress fractures, because there are various parts of our body that end up absorbing about 8 times our body weight. So ankles, hips, knees, these are giant joints that are designed to absorb the loads, but repetitive stress and strain can start to cause some problems down the road. And we also see, in terms of what I treat as a chiropractor, as I see a lot of hip pain, I see a lot of lateral calf tightness, I see a lot of lower back pain, and that's just to name a few, and we're going to go over the rest a little bit later on. Next, we want to talk about plugging holes in your sitness. So sitness is a term that I kind of like to look at. It makes a lot of sense. So we look at this person here up at the top. we see this individual has more aligned posture, the hips and the knees are aligned, and then the knee and the ankles align. This is where most of you guys spend your time. So we see a rounding of the upper back, we see the head coming forward. These are athletes who tend to have more pain in their knees. So if you're an athlete who notices that they're getting pain in their knees the more they sit, it's because you've got a shift in the pelvis, and we'll be going over that a little bit later on. Basically, what we're looking at is you guys are all academics first and athletes second. And I wrote that in the order that I did, athletes second and academics first, is because we want to make sure that we don't blur the lines. So what we see is there's a lot of pain overlap between what I call studentitis and also your athletics. So the similar muscle tissues that get fatigued, and one of the problems with that is you become under-recovered, which leads us to our second problem. Athletes who are under-recovered, we talked about this a little bit before. So if you exercise roughly for an hour to an hour and a half, that's not going to trump the 8 to 14 hours that you guys sit. In addition to that, there's also lack of sleep issues, there's nutritional concerns, some sort of academic stressor is always going to crop up, whether it's an exam or report that you have to do. And then what we want to look at is, when do the tissues ever get a break? So if you're constantly hammering the tissues athletically, but also hammering the tissues from a student's perspective, you're really under-recovered, and that sets you up for poor performance, especially when you're looking to get a PR out of your body. So when we look at fitness and sitness, how do we win? When we look at the individual over here, this is what we're striving for. This is the goal. This is what we want to have happen. We want to have ideal alignment of the spine. We also want to have ideal alignment of the lower extremity structures. Most of the time, the athletes come in and I see some version of this. So usually this stuff up here is usually from being an academic student. Here's when you guys sit for long periods of time, and anything lower down the chain we see is usually due to your athletics. So we want to look at the whole system. So the way that we win is we want to prioritize the nervous system, and that's where I come in as a chiropractor. My job is to evaluate the physiology and the geometry of the spine. We also want to see the tissues that get compromised due to all the sitting and the athletics and whatever sort of injury guys are coming in with. So my advice to every athlete is always to get strong. You're never going to hurt yourself getting strong, especially when you are doing it in a proper way. You have an athletic coach, you have a strength and conditioning coach, you're talking to your coaches. You want to have a linear progression in terms of your strength. You don't just want to pick exercises out of a book at random. There's an expression that we use in the office, which is that the nerves that fire together wire together. So what we're looking at is we're looking to build habits, patterns, and behaviors to reprogram the body. So whatever bad biomechanics you have coming in, we want to flip the script on that. We want to reset things. So what we're looking at is, once we get the nerves that fire together to wire together, we want to reinforce those good habits, patterns, and behaviors. It's usually in the form of some good corrective set of exercises. And then what we want to do is we want to put this on repeat. We want to get strong and we want to stay strong. And that's how you guys have fantastic seasons, and you minimize the risk of injury as you go throughout your season. Okay, so this is an example of what we're talking about when we're looking at poor posture and how this leads to poor athletic performance. So this individual here, his name's Kelly Starrett. He's a very, very prominent physical therapist out on the West Coast, and he's a very big dude. He's about 225 pounds, very, very thick and athletic, but he can put himself into, many different yoga positions that you'd cringe at. So he's a big guy, but he's also flexible. What he's demonstrating here is we're looking at what he's representing as an unathletic shape. So what we see is we see his upper back rounding, we see his shoulders slouching forward, we see the head and the upper back coming forward. So what we see for something like this is his spine is not holding his posture the way it should be. So this is a term that he refers to as hanging off the meat. And what that means is, when the spine is in alignment, everything is taut and everything is holding together properly. When it's not, you put strain into the muscle tissues here, and you put strain into the muscle tissues here in terms of the mid-back. And what ends up happening is, if you do this for long enough periods of time, the body starts to learn and remember that that's the proper posture that you want to hold yourself in, and it's not ideal at all for any athlete. So what happens is you have these deconditioned sitting muscles, and they become deconditioned sports muscles. So when you need to have your body at the ready, oftentimes we see athletes getting pain somewhere into the mid-lower back area below the shoulder blades. There's always going to be some sort of neck, upper back tension. You guys will usually have some sort of hip issue. You definitely have a knee issue, and then you may also have something down below in terms of the ankles. So what we're looking at is we want to fix this posture, but we also want to do it in a programmed way. So what we talked about previously, it's habits, patterns, and behaviors that can go both ways. So we take the patterns that you've learned over time and we want to reprogram them. So that's where we're headed. So this is another representation of what we just saw from the previous slide, kind of explained a little bit more. So what we see up here, these are the suboccipital muscle tissues that typically manifest as headaches. The neck, upper back, this is that burning pain that never seems to go away no matter how many times you put a lacrosse ball there or you foam roll it. The hip flexors are always stiff. So this is that time where you've sat in class for about 45 minutes or an hour. You go to stand up and you notice that you're stiff and you can't stand up right away. We also notice that you guys come in a lot with hamstring tightness, which you perceive as hamstring tightness, but that's actually reactionary because your pelvis actually starts to dump forward, and that puts pressure into the hamstring as well as the quad, which also leads to pain into the knees. So what we also see is because you're sitting the entire time, you lose your power, you lose your glute power. And we also see weakness into the abdominal core. So while you still may have visible abdominal definition, especially if you're a lean runner, you have a deconditioned core and you have a deconditioned glutes, and you need both of those things for success in your sports. So when we look at spinal loads and muscular failure, we're looking at biomechanical inefficiency. So what we want to do is we want to plug those leaks. So we want to take the muscle tissues that are tight and weak that we also see in the athletes, and we want to make those guys strong. All right, so finally, the meat and potatoes, the bigger ass. So this is what we refer to as the posterior chain. And I used a sprinting analogy because I think it's going to be the easiest for everybody to grasp. So everybody recognizes this guy up at the top making it look easy. And what we always look at whenever you're watching a track and field event, especially for that last final straightaway, the guy who wins the race or the girl who wins the race always seems to be the person who's speeding up. But what it is, I pulled this graph over here, and what ends up happening is we see from the beginning of the race all the way to the end of the race, there is a period of acceleration, and then there's a period of peak acceleration, and the athlete who's able to maintain that peak acceleration before they start to experience deceleration is typically going to be a winner. Right? So what ends up happening is athletes, especially sprinters, they have a lot of strength. These guys lift a lot more than they run. But what we're looking at is they have strong push and pull muscles. So when we look at the force that equals mass times acceleration, accounting for this athlete's body weight, if he can generate more force, he's going to generate more acceleration. So the posterior chain is one of the best ways that we get, and we also can see that when we train our athletes, whether you're cross-country kids, whether you're track and field kids, or whether you're some sort of other field athlete. So the posterior chain, we see the muscle tissues at the back, these big backstrap muscles, strong set of glutes, we see the hamstrings, quads, we got some calf stuff, but we're also going to be touching on some of the muscle tissues on the side of the hip. So that's where we're headed next. So what we want to do is we want to put simply, we want to fix your crappy posture, we want to prevent injury, we also want to optimize peak performance. And the only way we do that is by identifying what makes you weak as an athlete and what makes you weak as an academic. We want to strengthen both of those loads. Just wanted to touch on a point. I think this is very important. So a lot of times we see athletes come in and they always talk about when they want to stretch their hamstrings and want to stretch their hamstrings. But what ends up happening is you actually want to do the opposite. You want to strengthen your hamstrings and you want to stretch your quads. There is a sweet spot ratio, which is about 0.8 to 1 in terms of the hamstrings to the quad. So you want to have about 80% strength of your hamstrings that you do in terms of your quadricep muscles. What ends up happening is athletes always feel that they need to stretch their hamstrings, but it's actually the quad that's generating more force. So what happens is if you stretch your hamstring, you're actually making it worse because you're putting more slack into that tissue. You want to actually build strength. So that's something that's very, very important, and it's kind of hard to conceptualize, but hopefully that was made clear. Other things we want to look at is we want to strengthen the glute medius muscle, which is a stabilizer, and we also want to strengthen glute max, which is where you get your horsepower, which is where we saw Usain Bolt from the previous slide. And finally, what we want to do is we want to clean up some of the smaller muscle tissues that don't really get too much attention. So we want to activate certain muscle tissues, which are going to include the hip flexors, and they're going to include your calf muscles as well. So these are some of your primers and your stabilizers. Okay, so now for the good stuff. So if you've made it to this part in the presentation, everything after that follows is going to be what you want to focus on the most. I provided links at the end of this presentation, so if you want to find any of these videos, you can. And I've also put links at the bottom of the page. The camera at the bottom of the screen might cover it a little bit, but we should be good to go. All right, so this first exercise, this is called the reverse lunge, and its primary focus is to strengthen your glute max as well as your hamstrings. So to me, this is the easiest exercise that any athlete can do. All you need is your body weight, so there should be no excuses to do this exercise. So the starting position of this individual is top left, and what we're looking at is he's basically leading with his butt back. So when you do this exercise, you're thinking butt back, and you want to keep your shin vertical in the front. We want vertical shin here, and he's coming back. You also notice that he's kind of tipping forward. He's allowing his chest to come forward. When you do this exercise, you want to feel glute and you want to feel hamstring in the leg that's coming back. So glute and hamstring on the leg that's coming back. You're going to notice that you're going to want to stack the torso tall because this is what we've been taught before, but because this is a bodyweight exercise only, there's no dumbbells here, what we want to do is we have to use the biomechanics of the body. So here we see him, he's doing the opposite leg, so his far away hamstring and his far away glute are the ones that we're going to be focusing on in terms of this exercise here. What we want to look for is we want to ideally aim for 4 sets of 20 on each side. This is the same exercise looking from a different direction. Oftentimes when we see athletes that have weak glute medius muscles, which is that side pocket muscle on the side, if this muscle is not strong, the knee is going to have a propensity to cave in. And we see here, this athlete is demonstrating what most runners actually have. So if you've ever watched a runner at the end of a race, you're going to notice that their knees are going to start crashing into each other. And why that is it's because you've lost your lateral stability on either side of your hips. So what happens, you get this buckling of the hip relative to the knee, and then you can also get a little bit of foot cave here. So these are typically the runners that you see that start to develop that knee pain. So when you do this exercise, the cue is to not allow this to happen. You want to be like this guy here. You want to have a nice straight line, knee roughly over the toes, and you want to make sure that you're forcibly pushing this guy out. Second exercise. This exercise is called the running dead bug. This is going to strengthen your core and your lower back stabilizers by way of working your hip flexor. So what you're going to do is you're going to start by laying on your back, and you're going to treat this exercise seriously. It's going to feel like you're not getting much value out of it, but I assure you, if you do it correctly, you're going to minimize any potential lower back pain that you're going to develop, and as well, it's going to be beneficial when you sit. So what we're looking at is this individual here, as he's learning to brace his core. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your own hand on top of your abdominals, and you want to feel the steel. You want to feel those abdominals contract. You're going to hold that contracted abdominal area, but you're also going to breathe normally as well. So you're going to have to get used to bracing at the core, but also allowing for a deep belly breath. What we're looking at is we want to make sure that the knees are at 90 degrees. So this individual example, his knees are actually falling a little bit below, but we're aiming for that 90 degrees. What this individual is doing is he's alternating his legs while maintaining that 90 degrees here. You want to maintain your braced core throughout this entire duration of the exercise, and you're going to be aiming for 4 sets of 20 each. And remember, whenever you do any of these exercises, you want to go nice and slow. There's no points for speed. The slower and more deliberate you go, the better you're going to do. Continuing on with the dead bug, some of the things that we see that you guys do without meaning to is you're either going to have the leg drop down when you get fatigued, or what you're going to do is you're actually going to lose that brace. So what ends up happening here is this athlete has demonstrated losing his brace, and his back starts to round. It's because he's lost his strength. So now what you're doing is, as you do this exercise here, you're not getting the effectiveness of working that hip flexor. So this individual would be wasting his time. So always make sure that you're holding at 90 degrees, and always make sure that you're bracing at the core. If you find that the exercises are getting challenging, just take more breaks as you try to accumulate those 20 reps. This exercise here is a bit challenging, so I'm going to explain it. So this exercise here, again, I'm big on bodyweight exercises because I want you guys to learn easy exercises that you can do in the absence of weights at the gym. So there should be no excuses to not get strong. So this particular area here, this single leg box hop, it's going to strengthen the glute medius muscle and also the peroneal muscles, which are the muscles that are on the side of your calf, the outside side of your calf. So this is an amazing exercise because it's focusing on lateral stability and balance at the same time, because like we talked about earlier in the presentation, runners typically have poor balance and you typically have poor stability, so this exercise does both. So what I've done here is I've broken up this diagram into 2 different slides. So I'm going to focus on this one here. So cones are ideal, but if you don't have cones, just mark off 4 areas in your house. And basically what this athlete's going to do is he's going to leap diagonally forward from 1 to 2. Then he's going to laterally hop from 2 to 3. Then he's going to diagonally go backward from 3 to 4. And then he's going to stop and he's going to go back to his original position from 4 back into 1. When you do this exercise, you want to pause after each rep. You don't want to use your momentum to ping pong between 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 1. You want to rather go 1 to 2, balance, 2 to 3, balance, 3 to 4, balance, 4 to 1, balance. This diagram here is showing the athlete using his opposite foot. So because we've got 2 legs, we want to balance it out. So I basically reversed it. So you're going to go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 back to 1, and again, pausing each time. This is an exercise that you can do for time. So you can do 4 sets of 60 seconds. So you're going to do left leg for a minute, right leg for a minute, left leg for a minute, and right leg for a minute again for a total of 4 minutes. So again, you want to focus on pausing at each side, and you want to feel which of your 2 legs is weaker. This is a fantastic exercise, and you're going to notice a lot of bang for your buck. It will be the one that I would prefer out of all the exercises that I'm showing you today. This would be the one that I would have you guys focus on the most. Lateral step-ups. This is another good exercise for focusing on glute medius. So it's another lateral stability exercise as well as a balance exercise. This one does require you to step up on a surface, a stable surface. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a flat foot here, and you want to make sure that you're driving through your knee, and you want to make sure that you're trying to push your knee out as much as possible. Every athlete is going to have a little bit of a buckle into their knee. That's fine. You just want to make sure that you're powering up, and smiles are always for bonus points. The end position here is this athlete is nice and tall. His hip is stacked over his knee is stacked over his foot. He's a little bit of a lateral weight shift, but that's okay. And he's getting contraction into the glute in this side here, so glute medius and also glute maximus on this side. If you start to notice that you're swaying a little bit from side to side or forward or backwards, you are starting to lose a little bit of your balance, and your knee may start to buckle in. If so, just hold back on some of the reps and the sets, but this is something that you're going to look to do 4 sets of 20 on. Bulgarian split squat is another great exercise. This one focuses on glute medius a little bit, but also the quads, which is that front thigh muscle. This is good for training this muscle tissue here because you're controlling acceleration and deceleration. So you want to make sure that you have enough distance between your front foot and your back leg. You want to stand up nice and tall, and you want to have your weight in your heel. As you do the exercise, you may get a little bit of knee tracking over the toes, which is fine, provided it doesn't cause any knee pain, and you want to observe any lateral sway or any sort of balance issues. You're going to do 4 sets of 20 for each leg. Prisoner calf raise. This is a really fun exercise because, again, it's using that same box. So again, what you're seeing here is you're seeing a lot of value between these exercises because you don't need a whole lot of equipment to do them. Basically, what we're looking at is we're just making sure that you have enough technique and enough options. So I'm big on giving you guys options in the absence of weights. So this individual here has a low box that he's stepping up on. He has his hands clasped behind his head, and this helps him to stack his spine tall. So what's going to happen is you're doing just a vertical movement, and it's all happening at the calf. So what happens is you see his foot is flat here, and here he's in a calf raise position, and you can see the bulk of the muscle tissue engage. So he's not bending forward or bending backwards. He's just basically almost like if there's a string pulling him up, and his calf is doing all of the work. You also want to remember too that when you do this exercise, there's no weight into the front of the foot other than the fact that it's just holding you on here. You're not using this leg to do anything. Exclusively the work is being done by this back leg here. All right, so this exercise here, I think my camera is going to be in the way, so I'm just going to describe it. He's on a lower stepper here. You can use a step in your house. What he's done is he's got the back portion of his heel off of the edge of this bench here, and then he's working the soleus. The soleus is the muscle tissue that's underneath the gastroc, but it's valuable because it also helps to assist with Achilles strength issues. So what we're working here is his non-working leg is hanging off, and then this individual is using a wall assist for balance. I highly recommend you do so. And what you're doing is it's a very, very subtle movement, and you're basically just going up on your toes and then back down. Up on your toes and back down. And if done correctly, you're going to feel the muscle tissue underneath the gastroc, which is your soleus. And you're going to do 4 sets of 20 each side. Final point is whenever you do any of these exercises, always make sure that you are doing them slowly and deliberately. There's no points for speed. Elevated banded hip flexor march. This one's great because we're working our core and we're also working our hip flexors. So this is good for stability, right? Especially when you get tired as a runner. If you start to lose some of that core stability, you start to get sloppy in the lower half. So this individual, again, is using that step up area here. This could be a couple of steps in your house or a low coffee table, provided it's not glass. What you're doing is your starting position is going to have feet elevated. You're going to be bracing at the core as you lift up your hips. So his heels are the only point of contact on this one. If you don't have a band, you can still do this exercise. However, it is more valuable if you do it with a band. So the end position is he's still maintaining his core the entire time. Make sure that you stay relatively loose in terms of the neck. You don't want to strain any of the muscles in the neck. His hands are loosely on either side of his body. And what he's doing is he's basically pulling, and this opposite foot is resisting. So this leg here is the one that's engaging. And then he would switch, bring it back to neutral, and then he would switch and he would do his opposite side, his right leg here. You want to brace at the core the entire time. If you start to find that your hips are starting to drop, just take a couple of breaks, and what you're aiming for is 4 sets of 20 per side. Dumbbell high knee march, and then the second exercise on this slide is the dumbbell creeper walks. These exercises can be done with and without weights. So I picked one where he's demonstrating with weights, and the opposite slide he's demonstrating without weights. So you're going to be doing 4 sets of 20 for each of these exercises. This one particular heel, the high knee march, is focusing on your gastroc, and then this one here, the creepers, is focusing on the soleus. So I've given you 2 different exercises to work the soleus and the gastroc, last slide and this slide. So what he's doing here is everything is done slow and controlled. He's not marching for speed, he's marching for control. When you have control, you're teaching your body that you have stability into these lateral hip flexors, which are your glute medius. So this is kind of an extra bonus. So he's picked a set of weights that he can comfortably do for a set of 20 steps per leg. And what he's doing is he's taking a step, getting as high as possible, roughly 90-90, and then he plants his foot and he takes his another side. Don't use momentum to do this exercise. When we're looking at this creeper walk here, we're looking at the soleus. The soleus muscle is, again, the muscle that's underneath the gastroc. And what you're looking at is he's up on his toes doing this exercise here. So when he's doing that, his knee's translating slightly forward. So I would say definitely don't start with weights, especially because this is a new exercise for you. You're going to take a step, pause, and then you're going to take another step. Clamshell plus. This is an exercise I found a couple of years ago, and I think it blows anything out of the water. So whenever you think clamshell, I want you to tattoo this to the inside of your brain, and I want you to think clamshell plus. So what you're going to do is you're going to get yourself set up traditionally as you would with a normal set of clamshells, but instead what you're going to do is the top leg here, which is your working leg, you're going to shift your knee forward so that these knees are no longer even. And what's happening is when you do that, you put more tension into this muscle tissue here, so instantly the exercise becomes more valuable and you're actually recruiting more muscles. So you're being more efficient with the exact same exercise that you do. The caveat is that when you lift up your leg, which is demonstrated here in this particular exercise, you have to maintain that shift. So there's a little bit of coordination, but I trust you, once you do this, you're going to notice that you're going to have a lot more value and you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, especially into this key area here. All right, sideline hip abduction. This is an exercise where you're going to be laying on your side, and what's going to happen is his leg here is he's going to kick it up and then drop it down, and he's going to kick it up and he's going to drop it down. So these are also the old school version is where they call them the Jane Fondas. So basically you're laying on your side, you're lifting your leg up and down and up and down. So we're going to add a little bit of wrinkle to it, and we're going to make it harder because what I want you to do is I want to really reinforce having stability into this lateral portion of your hip. So what he does here is this leg here is actually going to bring it back slightly. So his leg is not in parallel, it's actually a little bit further behind, and that's going to recruit more of these muscle fibers here. So that's the first part of the exercise. So what you're going to do is you're going to start by doing a set of 10, and you're going to go as high as your body can comfortably go, bring your leg all the way back down. Second one, bring your leg all the way up, bring your leg all the way back down. You're going to do a set of 10. And when you do that set of 10, I want you to find the zone for where you feel you can get high as your body will allow you to get in terms of this hip area. Then what you're going to do for the magic is you're going to find that zone. So here would be his highest, high point. We want him to kick all the way up to the top. So these are called pulses. So you've done a set of 10 here, and now you're going to add a set of 10 pulses on that same leg. So this is a burnout round. It's really going to fatigue you, but I highly recommend that you do it because you're building even more strength and control into this area. The first couple of times you do it, you're going to find yourself a little bit defeated, but as you get better, you're going to notice that that area is going to be getting a lot stronger, and those exercises will be getting a lot easier. So you're going to start by doing 4 sets of 10 with 10 pulses on each side. So again, a set of 10 exercises here plus 10 pulses. Flip to the opposite leg, come back to this leg, do the other leg. So you're doing each leg twice for a total of 4 sets of 10. All right, so this concludes the end of the presentation. It was a bit of a long one, but I think if you stick with it throughout the entire presentation, you're going to get a lot of value out of this one. I've included all of the links down here. So we talked about athletes with strong glutes pretty much the entire time. I think this makes the case for athletes having a strong set of glutes, a bigger ass, if you will, by way of the posterior chain. This is by no means an exhaustive list of exercises, but I do believe that you're going to get a lot of value. And I put all the show note links here. I tried to label them as best as I could. And you can just Google these guys. So the prehab guys, their set of physical therapists, Mike Reinhold, great PT out of Boston, Kelly Starrett from the West Coast, and then the Running Experience had a fun video at the top. So I leave you with one of my favorite quotes, which is go forth, move well, and move often. All right, guys, until next time.